Yeah, with NHS, yeah.
Yeah, I work
Yeah.
with an NHS in Cincinnati.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, and excited to get started. My name is Marisa Novara, and I direct our housing and community development work here at the Metropolitan Planning Council. MPC has been around for 80 years. We are a regional planning and policy change organization, and we partner with businesses, government, and communities around the region to solve problems. One of the problems that we've spent a lot of time working on, as I know all of you have, is how to transform buildings into an asset when they're no longer serving their original purpose. So we're excited to delve into that topic today. Before we do, I need to thank our sponsors, and that is White & Company and Jones Lang LaSalle. And I'd like to welcome Lois Vitzel, who's a committee member here at MPC, and one of the sponsors of this event, to come up and say a few words before we get started.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today. I'm Lois Vitzel, Chief Sustainability Officer for White & Company and a member of MPC's Sensible Growth Committee. White & Company does architecture, engineering, and construction, but that's just a product. And organizations like MPC that work on community engagement and neighborhood stabilization are really critical to making the products that we spend our energy on be meaningful to neighborhoods. And you know, we're worried about the issues, the social issues that face our communities like Chicago. We work in Chicago public schools where we've done light and brights for many of the Chicago public schools and some of the most underserved neighborhoods in the city. And we've had personal insight from our engagement there of how much our work and the work of the organizations that are served by MPC can really make a difference in the neighborhood, bringing heart and social meaning into these works. And with a growing number of vacant buildings in Chicago, it's and in the region, it's really important that the community and the government organizations come together to give new purpose and meaning to these buildings in creative ways. And so White & Company, we're really delighted to support a session like today's session. I'm really looking forward to what we're going to hear today. And so I'd like to turn it back to Marisa to introduce the speakers.
Thanks, Lois.
So apparently something in one of the presentations we received is so exciting that it's crashing our computer. So we're going to restart it, I think. And while Ryan's working on that, I do just want to note, so not only do we have the panel discussion here that White & Company and Jones Lang LaSalle have supported, but we also have a workshop afterwards. So if you hadn't heard about that, we have a workshop following this. We'll conclude at 1:30. At 1:45, we'll start. If you have questions about how you might work with a community development finance institution to rehab a building in your own neighborhood, or if you've always wondered how to work with new markets tax credits but never understood that, that's something we'll be discussing, as well as how you might work with Cook County. If you are working in suburban Cook, there are resources available to you. So stick around and you'll hear from IFF, JP Morgan Chase, and the Cook County Bureau of Planning and Development after this. So to our topic today on transforming vacant institutional buildings. I'm just going to scoot ahead and catch up here. It's interesting to me how as we as a region shift, our real estate reflects some of those shifts. So manufacturing production, for instance, has dramatically shifted over the past 40 years. Where people live has dramatically shifted over the past 40 years, and our real estate begins to reflect that back to us. So what used to be maybe a school or a factory or a warehouse now sits vacant. And often what we've seen in Chicago is that many times when we have vacant buildings, institutional buildings, they're often located in neighborhoods that are already struggling with vacancy on the retail and residential level as well. So it's a challenging problem, one we know all of you have been wrestling with. What I'm excited about today is that we have a panel of people who've wrestled with that too and have come up with really creative ways to deal with that. And so we're excited to hear from all of them. And I also, before we jump to them, I do want to point out one creative strategy that MPC has employed just this year in the north side community of Uptown. I was still catching up. Thank you, White and JLL. Okay. So Uptown Stewart School. Stewart School was opened in 1907 and was one of the schools that was closed in 2013 by CPS due to under-enrollment. Clearly, it had been educating young people for a very long time in this neighborhood, and it was a big loss to the community. What we did when we learned that CPS would be issuing a request for proposals for that building was to partner with Alderman Kappelman and come up with a process by which people in the neighborhood could actually inform that RFP, that request for proposals, so that it actually reflected what people in the neighborhood wanted to see in this building. And I do really want to thank Alderman Kappelman's office for his support of that process. I know Brian Dyer is here from his office today, as well as Liza Balistreri, who's here from CPS, who was incredibly helpful and supportive through that process too. So what we did, you see here some pictures. This is called the Corridor Development Initiative, and it's a three-part community meeting, 3 2-hour meetings where people come together and actually build what they would like to see on a site. So these are aerial maps that you see here on the table. People built in how much residential, how much retail, how much parking, what kinds of community spaces that they wanted to see in this building. And then we actually worked through with developers how feasible their ideas were financially. Could you actually ever do this, was the question that we felt was really important to answer. And we came back to folks and said, well, you could do this, but you're going to have to make a few changes, and that's what development's all about, right? You're going to have to make a few trade-offs to close your financing gap and make it work, and here are some options. Here are some ways we could look at that. You'll certainly hear from our panelists today that was a big part of them getting through their projects, was the ability to work through that process and still come out with something that they were proud of. As we are certainly very proud of the end product. We have some copies out in the lobby by the elevators if you want to grab one. So the good news is we were able to get some really great ideas from very committed folks who live in Uptown, and that the results of that, Alderman Kappelman is now using to inform the RFP that CPS is preparing for the school. So it's something we really think is a model that can be used in other situations and other ways to really involve in a very meaningful way community residents in thinking through how to reuse these kinds of structures in their community. So I'd like to turn now to our panelists. And I'm not going to read you their bios. You have them in front of you. They're on your chair. But I do want to point out just a couple things about each of them and why we really felt each of them was a great fit to talk about this topic. Sarah White is with ArtSpace, and she'll talk first. Her projects combine affordable housing with innovative arts programming. And we look forward to hearing from her how she's overcome numerous challenges. We told her we don't just want to see pretty pictures. We really want to hear what were the problems you had and how did you get through them. Debbie Dixon next is with Gorman and Company. Debbie's really a Chicago institution in affordable redevelopment. She was my own mentor when I first started doing housing development many moons ago. But interestingly, we're actually not asking her to talk about Chicago today. We're asking her to talk about a development in Milwaukee that her company worked on, in which they transformed a vacant elementary school with really amazing results. I think you'll really enjoy hearing about. Margaret Haywood will tell us about, she's with Inspiration Corporation, and she'll tell us about a vacant warehouse in Garfield Park that not only serves a killer brunch, but also is training people for new careers. So if you have not combined a trip to the lovely Garfield Park Conservatory with a stop at Inspiration Kitchen in Garfield Park, I would recommend that you make it your business to do so very quickly. So with no further ado, I will turn it over to Sarah. We will hear from the three of our panelists, and then we'll be delighted to open it up to your questions at that time. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for inviting me to participate today. We're really I'm really excited to be here representing ArtSpace. Today I'm going to cover two projects that we've done. The reason I picked them is because I think these two projects really bookend very nicely the potential spectrum for historic preservation and sort of the trade-offs that you face in each circumstance. Karcher Art Space Loft I'll talk about first. That's a very substantial renovation of a historic building. And then Switching Station Artist Lofts is a very much more modest budget of a project that we did early in ArtSpace's history as a developer. And that's in the East Garfield Park neighborhood. I'm just so curious, is anyone here interested or had experience redeveloping historic projects in the past or will look to do so in the future? Or any developers that have that interest? Yeah, okay. Just curious on the audience. I'm going to skip over this because I think I'll take too much time talking if I cover up much about ArtSpace. But we're about a 30-year-old organization, and we've got 3 projects in the Chicagoland area, one in Elgin, one in Waukegan, and then East Garfield Park. We've got about 1,200 units across the country, and a typical ArtSpace project is a mixed-use development. Typically anywhere from 50 to about 70 or 80,000 square feet in a project. We have in almost every project that we do that combines housing, we have ground floor commercial space with affordable housing for artists above. Our commercial space really caters to nonprofit and creative businesses. We also have some non-housing commercial space as well, but most of our projects are mixed use, commercial and housing. And our mission is to create, foster, and preserve affordable space for artists and arts organizations. The first project I'm going to talk about is Karcher Art Space Lofts. I'm calling that Major Makeover. That is in downtown Waukegan on Washington Street. Downtown Waukegan, like many downtowns across the country, really suffered with the trend towards suburbanization. So there's a huge economic downturn for their downtown. The Karcher Hotel was a beautiful, gracious hotel. You can see from this hotel lobby what a stunning treasure it was for the city. So I'm calling this Before. And then I can't tell you how thrilled that I found a way to incorporate Spicoli into a historic preservation slide. But this is what I call Before. This is the Karcher when we acquired it. And Lord knows why we didn't run the other direction. But now that it's done, we just love the project. And, it's lots of blood, sweat, and tears, but if you have the right team and the ability to leverage enough resources, you can do really great things with important cultural assets. And just be careful about lead-based paint, asbestos, because it's sprinkled everywhere in these rubble piles. And so this is the after. This is what we call the renaissance for the Karcher. We were able to work closely with our community partners, the City of Waukegan, Waukegan Arts Council, and many others to give the building renewed life so it can continue to serve the community. So the hotel lobby is now a gallery space for artists of our housing. So it's artist housing development, and it's got this beautiful gallery.
Yeah.
So these two pictures, you see the above picture is the Karcher. I don't have the date on this one exactly, but I'm guessing it's a long time ago from how cool the cars look. And then below is a picture of us post-renovation, and that's what it looks like today. So the hotel was built in 1928, and in its initial use, it was a 140-room hotel. But as the downtown declined, it had other uses, and I think its last use before becoming vacant was as an SRO for seniors. And unfortunately, there was a devastating fire in 1984. Some of you may recall it. It was a Christmas Day fire, and the property stood vacant until ArtSpace was able to renovate it and bring it online in late 2012. And so we were able to adaptively reuse it to provide 36 units of affordable housing for artists. It does have ground floor space, and the development cost on this, because of how devastating a condition that the building was in, was pretty expensive. It was $15 million, which is just over $400,000 a unit, and that's with the building. That doesn't include the building cost. With the school situation, hopefully you'll be dealing with a supportive seller. I would say in the Karcher, we did not have a terribly motivated seller. The seller had tried and failed to renovate in the past, and he knew how important this cultural asset was to the city, so that was a real bargaining chip. So just words of caution when you're trying to acquire these cultural assets. You're not always dealing with motivated sellers. So environmental abatement, notice how big that number is. Get that scope defined early, get that contractor pricing that work early, like before you apply for credits. Everything, if there's any message you take away from me today, it's scope development very early, identify your unforeseen conditions, clear out that building, get rid of that rubble. It's a lot of pre-development level expense, but it will pay you in spades because you will know the majority of your unforeseen conditions, you will know the structure you're dealing with, you will know the bones of the building, what its issues are, and you'll have a solid, achievable budget going into your tax credit applications, assembling all your other financing. That way, when you're under construction, you've got enough contingencies to make your way through. The alternative is if you miss some of that, those things are still going to come out of the woodwork once you get under construction, and those change orders could exceed your contingency and eat into your developer fee. So that's, a big, cautionary tale for doing really substantial historic renovations. So our, hard costs on this were about $11 million. Our developer fee was about $1.2 million. When you're doing historic renovations, architecture and engineering fees definitely higher than what you would pay on new construction. So plan on 8 to 10 or 11% of the hard costs for your architecture and engineering fees, because they'll definitely be higher. Tons of different funding sources to make a project of this level happen. $15 million, especially in a smaller community, is a lot of money to raise. The two most substantial funding sources, of course, would be 9% low-income housing tax credits and historic tax credits. But we also used a bunch of different local, county, and state level resources. In addition to working with IFF on our first mortgage. IFS was a terrific partner. I know we have an IFF member in the audience, and they were great to work with. The county was actively involved. The city was, a key partner. I mean, they provide substantial capital and support to the project, particularly during pre-development when you're spending a lot of money on reports and architecture engineering. And the other thing that was really cool about this, I'm going to talk about in another slide, is the local philanthropic campaign. And that was, I think, a really important, very cool aspect to this project and the community work we did. But notice the developer note. And that's why I'm saying get your team in early, because any change order, you can't not do the work. You have to do it, and if you're not doing the homework, if your architect doesn't have unfettered access in the building very early on, that eats into your fee. We're fortunate at ArtSpace. We're a very mission-oriented group. We can weather these sorts of things. We have a really great fundraising team, and there's a lot of philanthropic support supporting the work we do across the country. But other groups may not be so lucky. So the developer fee is really the bread and butter of what you do, and so really do the homework and have the right team. So, pick an award-winning architect. If you're doing a really challenged building, go find the architects that are winning the awards for historic renovation. Really study their track record, the projects they've done. Hire also an award-winning historic consultant to support the work and vet the decisions the architects are making. And find the best contractor you can that's done historic projects. And hire them right away and get them all working together and in the building, and like I said, clean it out and get into what the structure and the bones of the building are. That's key, in my opinion, to making a project that works. And then, also just really carefully consider environmental remediation, because it will have lead-based paint, it will have asbestos. And touching real quickly on the community process, we had, in every art space project, we are invited to the community, so we always have really terrific local partners. Here we worked really closely with the city, the Parks District, the Main Street Association, and the Arts Council. And they really had a firm vision that they wanted an art space project to build on their budding art scene and all the great work that they had been doing to revitalize their downtown. So that was really the focus of the community engagement work there. And then the Arts Council did an awesome job of organizing a philanthropic effort. And what that did was, although it raised a fairly modest amount of money, it was really important because it got everyone in the community invested in the outcome of what was going to happen with the project. So, for example, a local councilman dedicated a portion of his salary to the fundraising campaign. No contribution was too small. Everyone could participate. And a local beer company donated a portion of their sales. So it was a great way to get the word out about what was going to happen at the project and give people a chance to get involved in supporting its redevelopment. And just one final word on this slide about, working with sellers, maybe not the most motivated sellers. Spend the money and have an attorney do a good contract. If you're going to be needing to do selective demo, you need a decent contingency period to figure out if you can what is it going to cost to do this? How much time do I need to assemble the financing? You really need a contract that protects you in these kinds of situations. So again, that's money well spent in my opinion. The next one I'll talk about is in the East Garfield Park neighborhood. That is Switching Station Artist Lofts. I don't know why I felt compelled to give them a little title, but this is Historic on a Budget. And this one is on Homan Avenue, right next to Garfield Park. Picture to the left is our exterior shot of the building with a little outdoor area for the residents. And then this is a hallway shot of residents interacting. And we have, a common feature in all of our art space projects is extra wide corridors and doorways. One, the wide corridors will let the residents program the hallways with art. So you always see artists with their art outside their door. And then it also allows more easily for equipment to be moved to and from the unit, like big paintings or equipment and that sort of thing. So these two pictures just show how artist residents have created workspaces within their units. Our concept is live-work housing. This is a shot of the exterior of the property and a shot of this really beautiful, gracious, open stairwell that we have, and it's got these terrific marble floors. And the story of how we came to adaptively reuse the switching station was in 1999, then Mayor Daley, it was in Minneapolis and had toured some of the art space projects that we had done in the Lower Town neighborhood of St. Paul, and they, really contributed significantly to the redevelopment and revitalization of Lower Town. So he was really inspired and invited us to consult on the feasibility of doing a project in East Garfield Park. And his office helped us to ID the Rentgen School, which originally was built in 1906 as a switching station, telephone switching station. Had really great features for artist housing. The development costs, we finished it in, I think, 2003. Okay, and today that would be about equivalent, I guess, I'm estimating about $7 million adjusted for inflation. So a pretty modest budget. We had 24 units. Again, look at the environmental abatement. I think that really tells a story of what environmental abatement entails. This is a modest project, but it still nonetheless was on $300,000 to do the environmental abatement. Modest sources, too. I mean, it's a small budget. I wish all my budgets only had 4 sources. But, the city and the state supporting us significantly with the redevelopment. I'm going to skip over this one. We worked really closely with the Duncan YMCA. This is a shot here of the interior courtyard, which is really nice and quiet. Duncan YMCA, though, was a close partner. They worked really closely with us to do all the community engagement, hosted all our community meetings. And I would say the challenges with switching station, it's a really nice project, but it's small. So, and the budget was small. And, some of these schools you may find, I don't know the context of all of them, but they might have limited square footage footage. You might not be able to get a lot of units out of them. So you might consider non-housing uses unless you have, I would say 50,000 square feet would be a good number for a housing, 50,000 square feet for a building. But you could also look at adding a new addition if you were really committed to the idea of providing affordable housing with some of these schools. But anyway, we had limited square footage, only could provide 24 units. 50 units is really our sweet spot, we think, for affordable housing, affordable artist housing. And then our initial concept was to have community programming in the basement, which I think, a basement space is not ideal. But again, because we were dealing with such a small building, that felt at the time like the only option for community programming space. But then we also had a very tight budget, so we weren't really able to build out the space in a way that really supported programming. So it ended at that. The community programming piece just didn't pan out the way we had envisioned. And then with such a limited budget, there were a number of historic features that I don't feel like we touched. I think we could have done more tuck pointing. We could have done more to restore historic tiles in the entryways, and the marble flooring, I think, could also use more restoration. So if we were to re-syndicate this, hopefully we'd be able to layer it with historic tax credits. This was, again, on early projects for art space, so I feel like we are sort of still finding our sea legs in some ways as a developer. So I think, lessons learned looking back, we would have perhaps tried to leverage a little bit more money and do a bit more renovation and improvement work for the project. And then, we've done a number of other schools outside of the state of Illinois. This is Bell School campus in New Orleans. This is a school that's vacant and was severely devastated in the Hurricane Katrina. We're hoping to start work on that next year. PS 109 is in the heart of New York City. This is just coming online for occupancy, but this provides 90 units of artist housing. So on the left, you see the completed entryway. On the right, there's just some snapshots of it. But the center picture is it's boarded up, and then there's a few shots of it under construction there. We've done an adaptive reuse of Franklin School into Franklin Arts Center in Brainerd, small town in northern Minnesota. And then the Washington Studios in Duluth. And that's somebody's unit. That's a former track. That's a great unit. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Isn't that neat? I just love that.
Yeah.
So
I could do that.
something to do in winter, right? Mm-hmm. And this is just a map showing where Art Space is working across the country. And that's all I got. So thank you.
See what I'm pushing here. Wrong thing already. Assistance.
So why don't you just click this way?
Okay, all right, okay, there we go. All right, first of all, my name is Debbie Dixon, and I work for Gorman. I work for Gorman and Company. I've been with the company now for about 3 years. I've had, you've seen my resume in the package. I am definitely a community person, walking the pavement in the streets, trying to make things happen in our community. It is not easy, but I can tell you that the resources that we have available now, especially as it relates to adaptive reuse of schools, is really a asset, for this city. I think the topic today is just critically important as, we're looking at the availability of about 50 closed schools that are available for adaptive reuse. CPS has launched a website that centers around community engagement process, and that to me is so important. And and Liza should be really complimented. I don't know if you've been to the website to see it, how it's well put together, but if you haven't, I would highly recommend that you go in and get the details. I think it will incite you to start your mind to thinking about how can we pull this together, how can we pull a team together, what are the exciting ideas about the property that would certainly help us. I think community input is key for sustaining neighborhoods, but more importantly, we just have to make a commitment to create, plan, and have a voice in the communities. The worst thing in the world we could do is let these schools stay vacant for long periods of times because it will erode and eat into the fabric of our neighborhoods, and that is not, a good thing. So that's why I'm really excited about you looking at the website, finding out where the schools are, and engaging your community to have conversation about it if you haven't already. I think the first thing to do is try to identify the highest and best use, and that is a community process as well. There is all kinds of adaptive reuse project, the end results. You can have student housing, veterans, special needs, families. But that all depends on the market that you are in. There's other types of public service buildings with residential above and a mixed-use building. There's live-work that is really becoming very popular where people can, start to learn their trade. I mean, a lot of people, you grow up, you get a job, and then you work, but, you still had a dream of something that you was just implanted in your heart that you were good at. And I think entrepreneurship is a feature for lots of our inner city neighborhoods to give people that impetus to not only work for themselves, but it might be that little gap of money that you might need in starting your own business to supply with your employment in order to get your living at a level that you can really not have to be under the poverty scale at all. But, you have senior housing. Certainly you want to look at these historic buildings and focus on trying to remember the history, which also comes with the neighborhood. And I think that is another feature that really helps us in our communities to kind of identify with, to try to have a sense of pride and in terms of your community and get children involved as well. I know we talked about, pretty pictures, and believe me, if you had have saw some of these institutions before they were rehabbed, you would say amen. And I could appreciate you because I don't have any before pictures, but I can appreciate what she did show you because that is real. That's what you're walking into. Fortunately, for Gorman, we are a fully integrated company, so we have construction, architectural teams, asset management, property management. So when you get into a situation that, you're really scratching your head about how do we go about this, you can make course changes and look at that project from the eyes of various professionals at the table in order to make this a viable project. As you can see here, I did something wrong. Need help. I hit the wrong button. I need to go back. Okay, I'm back. In most schools, you have very wide hallways. Now you have to be able to try to address that. And one way of addressing it is, again, preserving history. And as you can see there is lots of murals and the Obama wall that is actually made up. It's digital, and I'm pretty sure some of you have seen that. And so if you look very closely, it's a lot of little pictures that make up a bigger picture. And so these are the things that people come through the neighborhoods, they come in the building, and they actually give history lessons of the school, of the project, just by walking the hallway. So I thought that was just a great feature. This was Jackie Robinson School. It was not always Jackie Robinson School. It was another school before that, and then it turned into Jackie Robinson Middle School. And so as you can see, also using pictures to depict the history for that particular school. Some of these walls that you see here now are 2 stories high. So you can actually look down the wall and look to the first floor, and all of that is one consistent mural of the building. So the next school that I was looking at is in Moline, Illinois. It had its last graduating class in '58. It had been vacant for years. We partnered with the city of Moline. It was completed in 2006. It's 60 units, 50 affordable and 10 market rate. It's also for the creative class and artist community. I love the history of these schools, because when you get into digging in it and you find interesting people who have lived there. I believe one of the former governors of Tennessee, this is where he graduated from, and Louis Bellson, and I'm not going to date myself, but he was a jazz drummer, but I didn't know he was married to Pearl Bailey. And I mean, when you come into a community and you know facts like this, it really helps in giving an education. And Carol Burnett graduated from the school as well. So this is how we took exception to, again, the long hallways and making kind of the dormed archway over the stairs. We didn't make that. That was there, but it's always something that you've got to consider, and how do I use space accordingly. Most of our facilities have a cadre of support amenities, and they usually always have some type of exercise room, some type of small theater where people can see presentations. And this one, by catering to the arts, it has, certainly a dark room. It has a queue. It has, carving tables. It has a lot, of amenities where people can really put their hands to task to actually complete their art. The next project was the Dr. Wesley Scott project, and this is a senior housing of 80 units, and it was a joint venture with the Urban League. And Dr. Scott, he was a leader and visionary in Milwaukee during the civil rights movement in the 60s. This was a project in which part of the building was existing. It was a business college, and so we built new construction along with it in order to come up with, I believe that project we actually had, and excuse me, a total of 80 units in it, but it does have, certainly all of the green roofs and other kind of energy efficiency items that makes it appealing. So, and it was in a very, very tough neighborhood, but it did galvanize the community. People started to, take care of their homes. I mean, before people kind of get lulled to sleep, and then once something catalyzes, an area, then people kind of wake up and they start to be fully engaged. This project is called Kunzelman Easter. It's also an artist loft, but this one put me so much in the mind of place-making space. When it has a dental office, and it also has it was an old furniture store, but now it has a men's warehouse for big men. And I think it was quite interesting when you're looking at this community also struggling, but now you can look at maybe adding some bistro kind of tables on the outside and galvanizing and working around this community to make sure we are increasing the commercial space in others, or enhancing other people to come in and businesses, and now to start to kind of get that circulation of the dollar in our neighborhoods. And that's what's really missing, where, in some neighborhoods, the dollar is shared with the baker who buys it. He takes it to the pet store, and then it circulates in that one community before it goes, out into economic land or wherever it goes. But in most of the inner city communities, it might last 5 hours. And this was, a fact. So we need to try to get more businesses in our neighborhood. This picture here, and you see those little animals, that was all paper mache, and they have galleries nights 4 times a month that people can come in. They sell their works, and this was a gentleman was selling his paper mache, animals. Again, getting back to this placemaking space, I think we need to have really a conscious effort, to create livable streets and walkable communities, things that are pedestrian friendly, planter boxes, amenity enriched. And I think when we look at these projects, that's the lens that we should be looking at. And it could be something even smaller. It's just maybe a streetscape visual that you can put there. On some of our live work, you actually have, marquees, business signage that you can, that will be outside your apartment. You actually live and work there. And we had one lady who actually was a fashion designer, and this is what she had in the doorway of her business, and so it was quite successful. The keys to success, and I heard that said earlier, you need to start early. You need to have select a good preservation consultant, assemble a team that has expertise in historic preservation, and of course get the SHPO office out, which is the State Historic Preservation Office, to the site real early, so then you can start to design your program with what they may be able to give you some guidance there. I just put in another picture. This was that reminded me so much of your project, because this was a part of the brew house in Milwaukee, and it was 30 sites there. And this, honest to Pete, it was a rubble inside, just like that picture, and now it's a hotel. And they kind of use this was one of the buildings that they brewed the beer in, and it had these copper canisters, and they just cut off the top of them and brought them down and left them in the building to kind of give some dimension to that space. So this is a hotel, and this is, again, some of the use of space that they did. So that's it for me. We are a 30-year-old company. We've got 230 people working for us over 4 states. We've done about 70 to 80 significant development so far. And I think the public-private, partnership is key. So thank you very much.
All right, that's me. My name is Margaret Haywood. I'm the Director of Workforce Development at the Inspiration Corporation. And we are not developers. I'm not developer, so our story is a little bit different from my predecessors. So I'd like to tell you what we do, and then how we came to be looking for a building, and then what the process of obtaining and rehabbing that building was like. We started out as a meals program for people who are homeless, and for many years that was the extent of our organization, was providing meals in Uptown for those in need. And over the years, we've developed other programs to help people exit homelessness, because early on, the staff realized we could go on feeding the same people for the rest of their lives and our lives if we didn't do something to help them to develop the skills to become more self-reliant. So now we provide housing and workforce development services. I'm in charge of our 2 workforce development programs, which include our food service training program, which started in the year 2000. And when the program was started, it was the executive director's intent that someday we would have a real restaurant to do the training in, with the idea of creating revenue for the organization and for the realistic training experience it provides for the students. So in 2005, we opened our first restaurant, and it's on Sheridan Road in Uptown, in between Lawrence and Wilson. And it's a real restaurant. People sometimes say, well, can I come to your restaurant? Yes, please come to my restaurant. It's the kind you want people to come to. It's that kind of restaurant. But I think there's some confusion with our meals program for people who are homeless are called cafes. So if you might have heard our name, Inspiration Cafe, you might have volunteered with us. If you're Charles Dubois, you might have worked for us. One of my former coworkers is in the audience. And then with the restaurants, with Inspiration Kitchens is the name of our social enterprise restaurant. So those are the ones that we want you to come to and eat at. So our students are the ones who produce all the meals. that's where the meaning for the restaurants comes from us. So the 2005 restaurant we opened, we rent the space there, so we don't own that building. We had been going for a couple of years. Things were going well. The icy hand around my heart, that the fear of us failing with that had finally released. So we were ready to think about our next enterprise. And we happened at that time to cross paths with a local philanthropist who was thinking about his legacy in Chicago. And fortunately for us, we have a good enough reputation that when he talked to some other nonprofits around town, they kept directing him back to us as the people who could help manifest his dream. So he had this idea that he wanted a restaurant that was a nice place for working poor families to go out to eat. And that was kind of the extent of how far the dream was fleshed out. So after probably a year of negotiation and discussion with him and telling him how our ideas about how this could work and could incorporate the social enterprise and the training element that we wanted, he finally gave us a gift that allowed us to purchase a building. So I don't have a long budget that shows where all the grants came from because it was largely from this one donor. We did get a couple of other grants that helped us. And he provided some seed money to get our program started in Garfield Park. So let me tell you the process that we went through to identify the neighborhood, first of all, and then find a building. We were looking for a neighborhood that had a high percentage of working poor families. There are a lot of those in Chicago. And we had narrowed it down to some neighborhoods on the west side. And I and some of the other senior staff are horrible north siders who know where everything is on the lakefront, and the west side was a mystery to us. So a big part of the decision-making process was we finally got in the van and we went and looked at some of the neighborhoods on the west side. And we had really, at that point, it was sort of down to Austin and East Garfield Park. And when we saw these neighborhoods, that really clinched the decision to go to East Garfield Park. Because although Austin is a neighborhood that is highly impacted by poverty, there are some things going on, and there are some lively business strips. You can drive down Chicago Avenue and some other places, and you'll see stores that are open and people out on the street. And then when we drove around East Garfield Park, I felt like I had gone to the moon. There were all these empty lots. 1 in 3 lots in East Garfield Park is empty, and I live in Uptown where there's no empty lot. Just not a lot of in the way of thriving business strips, not a lot of people out doing anything really in need of what we were hoping to provide. So once we set on East Garfield Park, we worked with, our realtor was David Baum, who looked at a number of spaces that were on the market, but also the space they found for us was not actually on the market. They were just looking for buildings that were sort of in the range of what we needed and could be worked with, and so they approached the owner of a building for us, and that's what we wound up buying. Everything else, it was very much Goldilocks. Everything else was too big or too small in Garfield Park that we looked at. So that's how we came to our building. Now, is this the, all right. Thank you. There we go. See, if you turn it over. So there's our organization and our organizational website if you have questions about the social service side of what we do. And then I've been kicking myself that I don't have better before pictures. This is something I grabbed from Google Street View, and I hope it conveys how truly horrible the building was. The person who owned it was using it as storage for sporting goods. He owns sporting goods stores around town. So whatever interior work had been in this building was gone. There was no drywall or plaster on the walls. It was all down to the brick, which was covered with approximately 60 generations of spider webs. And then it was just floor to ceiling full of stuff. But I think you can see it did not look wonderful on the outside of the building. And then there was an empty lot next to it that was just overgrown with weeds. And now it looks better. Our architects were Wheeler Kearns. We also used IFF as our owner's representative, and I'm terribly grateful to them. They were wonderful to work with. And so Wheeler Kearns was really helpful in figuring out for us how to use the space the best and what to do with it. For one thing, clearing up weeds was a good place to start. So now we have another restaurant here, and as I said before, all the food is cooked by the participants in our program. Here's some more before and afters. So on the right hand then where it says after, that's the dining room. And all the tables and the host stand are all reclaimed barn wood. We did get LEED gold certification on the building. That was important. both to the staff of our organization and to our donor, that we try to do this as sustainably as possible. We got a grant from the Illinois Clean Energy Fund to get solar tubes that are up on the roof of the building that provide most of our hot water. And restaurants use a lot of hot water, so that's fairly significant. They also helped us to obtain a variable speed hood. The hood in a restaurant is over all your cooking elements, your stove, your deep fryer, your grill, whatever. Anything where the fire might start. That's where your fire suppression system is. The hood is also what takes the air out of the building to get like the cooking smells out, any smoke, and take it outside. So in a normal restaurant, the hood is either on or off. And when it's on, it's taking all the air that you've already paid to heat or cool and taking it right back outside, so you have to keep heating or cooling your space, depending on the time of year. The variable speed hood turns itself up or down and doesn't work any harder than it has to, based on how much heat is coming off of your stove and everything. So if you're busy, it turns itself up. If nothing's going on right then, it turns itself down. So that saves energy as well. This is looking out of the kitchen into the dining room on the right. And another picture of the dining room. We're right across from Garfield Park. Our windows look right out there. A lot of work was put into the shell of the building to create insulation, because you can also see we're right by the L tracks. If you're in our dining room, you don't notice it because there's so much insulation, and there's triple pane glass in the windows with an argon buffer, which is very science fiction to me. And then this is in the dining room looking at the multi-purpose room. And you see there's the wood slats. It almost looks like a barcode on something you would buy. That was the architect's idea. I would have just said, well, we'll have a plain wall and we'll put some art on it and people will like it. And this idea was to connect both to the wood in the building and the wood across the street in the park. And then this is the website for our restaurants, if you'd like to see our locations and our menus and find out about our catering and things like that. One of the things that was important to us in the process was the community engagement. We were very aware that we were a North Side organization going into a West Side neighborhood, an organization that's largely has senior staff who are white, going into 99% African American neighborhood. The Garfield Park Conservatory Alliance was extraordinarily helpful to us and continues to be this day. They were a body that was managing the New Communities Project for Local Initiatives Support Corporation in that neighborhood. And so our idea of bringing in both a business and social services to help people prepare for jobs fit within the plan for that neighborhood. So they allowed us to come out to community meetings. They already had scheduled for committees for open space and safety and housing. And so we went out to all their committees and made presentations about what we were going to do, but we definitely borrowed a little of their credibility. You know, they were already in the neighborhood and a known entity, and because they gave us their stamp of approval, I think that paved the way with a lot of the community and other organizations. So thank you very much for having me today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Whoop, I'm going to go back. And I'm just so grateful for the variety of insights gathered from the three of you. And before we turn it over to questions, which we'll do in one moment, I just want a few things that jumped out to me of what you all talked about. Making the history of the building and the neighborhood part of the new building was really a theme that came up a lot. How do you incorporate what this space itself used to be, or what people in the neighborhood used to use it as, or what the neighborhood used to be in its heyday? How do you bring that into its current identity? Really seemed to be a really important part of thinking about its new identity. From a practical standpoint, I was struck by sort of, again, going back to some of our experience in Uptown and helping people at a community level work through these questions. From a development level, thinking about how do you weigh the importance of programming, restoration of historic features, and affordable housing. If you can't do all of them in the budget you have, how do you make those decisions? And clearly there's ones, Sarah, where you would say, I wish we could have done that, and we couldn't do it in this case. Or when we go back and resyndicate at year 15, we'd like to kind of help adjust for some of the things we couldn't do on the front end. It's an interesting question how at any one point you have to make some decisions about which of those different features that are clearly all important are you able to get done. I appreciated, Debbie, your thoughts about how a building interacts with and improves the street experience and the importance of thinking about how people who may never enter the building can also still have a positive kind of experience with that in their community, and perhaps through things that you bring out of the building and into the sidewalk or features that are part of the external of the building. And, the importance of local partners. I appreciate you bringing that home, Margaret, and the importance of building relationships if that's not a community in which you're already quite active. I know for many folks here, you're working in neighborhoods like Angela in South Chicago. You are there. That's your day-to-day. That's what you're doing. In other cases, you might be coming into somewhere to really look at a project, and that's where, the building of those local relationships is just so key. And then really thinking about how do you meet local needs with this space? What are the needs of this community, as Margaret, you really highlighted with the need to think about job training as part of the end use of this building is just a fascinating kind of full circle for that space. So I really thank you for helping us kind of think through all of these parts of this very important puzzle and for the frank conversation about the challenges and the trade-offs that you had to make. I now want to open it up to all of you to ask questions of our panelists. We do have two folks with a microphone. We are recording it, so I ask that you wait till we get you the mic to ask your question. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Joanna Trotter with the University of Chicago. I think this question is both for Sarah and Debbie. When you have a very specific population like artists that you're trying to access and tap, how do you pick your location, and then how do you handle the waiting list and HUD regulations in order to cater to that particular population?
I think for our end, of course, you can't discriminate, if a person, is not in the artistic, family. But we certainly try to market toward that population because, let's face it, we do have a lot of amenities that are in these buildings for that particular population. So, there is a wait list, and when you sign up, we just have to go to the next person. It is a challenge, to get that done.
We have I call it, when we're in, layman's terms, it's artist housing, but, in more precise terms, it's affordable housing with a preference for artists. And so we do a lot of marketing from, day zero forward. I'll do during pre-construction and construction. We're finding ways to engage with arts groups, and so when we do our HUD Fair Housing Marketing Plan, we determine who are the groups least likely to apply, and then we try and layer over that, are there arts organizations that also serve that population? But we do lots of activities and are constantly engaging with community partners. A couple examples would be, I have a project in Cincinnati, and we've done pop-up galleries. We did an after party after our groundbreaking. So they're just ways to make sure that the arts community knows about the project. Anyone can apply and are encouraged to apply, but the applications are on a first-come, first-served basis. And, depending on the market you're in, you might have to do a lottery. Very urban area like Chicago, you're doing lotteries, but sometimes you're working in smaller communities where you're not as oversubscribed as you would be in a major metropolitan area like Chicago. So, it's just getting artists aware of the project and making sure that they apply the day the window opens or are able to be there when we're doing the lottery and applying. So it's not 100% that all of our units are by artists, but that's what our goal is. Yep.
Hi, thanks. Rob Rose, I'm with the Chicago Community Loan Fund. And this question is for all three of you. Part of the premise of these redevelopments is that it serves as a catalyst for further development. Could you talk just briefly about some of the other developments that have happened as a result of your developments of these buildings?
Well, first of all, I can say in some of these neighborhoods, people had got really despondent. The homes were not kept up. Some have lost their homes. And one of the facilities for the seniors, most of them that were there were victims of predatory lending, and that's why they wound up in an apartment there. They actually lost their homes. So I think we have to approach this in a way that we look at what the need is in that community and continue to reach people that we can serve best. If I'm answering your question, for you, I think I might have lost it a little bit here.
Debbie, did your development in other ways stimulate other projects?
There you go. Thank you for bringing me back home. All right. Okay. Yes, as a matter of fact, in some of these neighborhoods, we've actually done 2 and 3 other developments because of that. In our single-family arena, we're working on maybe the 7th project of trying to rehab single-family homes in a particular community. In some of these communities, we have, in the brew house area, have done 2 or 3 projects, that was a catalyst for one that then turned into the other. Thank you very much, Marissa.
I wish we could claim that more development had happened as a result of our opening a place on Lake Street. And I know that when we talked to the Chamber of Commerce about coming into the neighborhood, they said this social service stuff is nice, but we're excited about you opening a business, hoping it would be assigned to other businesses. I can say that the convenience store down the street from us did repaint their signs sometime after we opened, and it looks a little bit nicer. So unfortunately, I think that's the most we can claim.
Yeah, but that's a good one. That's a good one.
I think in Art Space's case, we've seen neighborhoods transform in quite a few cases pretty significantly, but I wouldn't say it's because of Art Space. I would say it's because Art Space or an artist housing type project that provided affordable commercial space for new businesses and creative businesses. That was the catalyst, is that it was part of a multi-pronged approach of the local leadership to make change in a particular neighborhood. So, for example, I think, for Art Space, our oldest projects are in Lower Town, St. Paul, which used to have the designation of St. Paul's Skid Row. And there was the Northern Warehouse was our first project when we made the leap from advocate to developer. And then we also did the Tilsner, which is right next door. And those are really gorgeous old buildings that were just in as bad a shape as the Karcher. And it was a place no one wanted to be. And 20 years later now, the light rail is going through it. There's a baseball stadium going in for minor league baseball. But it wasn't just because Art Space did a project there. It was part of a kind of multifaceted approach on the part of the city leadership. And I would say Elgin, we just finished a project in Elgin a year or so ago, and the changes happening in their downtown are pretty significant from when we first came there. So I was just there the other day, and I saw like maybe 3 new businesses under, doing tenant improvements, and lots of cool things happening. So I think it really comes down to local leadership and the resources they're willing to commit to redoing a neighborhood.
Hi, Sandra Bivens, Executive Director, 51st Street Business Association. We're going through a rehabilitation of our strip from King Drive to the Expressway. And we do have schools and other buildings that we are looking at to try to, refit, to do some other things because they have closed down one of the schools in our area. But what I find with community groups like ourselves being smaller, getting people like you at the table to help us even come up with some strategies to get the funding to turn these buildings around, especially when CPS here in Chicago is talking about selling the schools at market rate. which makes it almost non-affordable for an average community group to even put it into the budget if you have to pay a large amount of money for the buildings, you know. And then, of course, the politics that goes along with it. How do we get you guys at the table to even take our calls and say, hey, we got this project and we think it could make use of money, but at the same time it could turn our community around, you know? So to me, that's a key thing.
Well, since I'm holding the microphone, I'll go first. But I think if there's a particular asset or strip that needs an experienced development partner on, I think the first step is getting attention to that area and getting the political will. I think the political will to redo an area is probably the most important factor because, you know, the pie is limited and it takes a lot of resources to, particularly with historic preservation of cultural assets, takes a lot of money. So, and I think part of that political will is a lot of times real estate developers do have those kind of connections that can help you do the advocacy work necessary. So, you know, at ArtSpace, it would start in our consulting department with a call to Wendy Holmes, or we could chat after this if you like. And then I'll turn it over to you because you probably have some really even better ideas.
No, I'd have it. I do agree with you on the political will, but, you know, I would say it is definitely a phone call. I know I certainly am open, you know, to listen to any suggestion and take that to the team. It will depend on the market. You know, are we on the upswing, you know, or is it kind of stagnated? Because that would, you know, maybe not to say that it won't get done, but maybe not this year, you know, as you try to do some improvements, you know, to give it a little impetus to kind of get it jump-started. But, you know, for a phone conversation, you know, Google Earth or drive to the site or drive around the neighborhood to look at some market studies would be, you know, not a lot of upfront work. You know, to be quite honest, to say this is the opinion. I don't see any reason why you can't have a conversation, certainly with me.
Okay, we have one question here and then we'll go back.
Brenda Swartz with Concordia Place. So this question is for Debbie. I noticed on one of your slides you had EB5 funding. Could you talk a little bit about what the role that played in your project?
And it was a terrific role. It certainly brought in.
Explain what it is, Debbie.
EB5 is a generation, you generate funds from an investment for people who are, you know, actually the Chinese, it's called EB5, that they're looking for visas to come into the United States. So they put up $500,000 apiece. You know, and it gets fully vetted. I mean, you know, you got to know where the money is coming from. They track it to the press, and, you know, once you get approved for it, they can make an investment, and out of that investment, they can get a visa. So it has really helped tremendously in the projects that we have been involved in, especially for hotels. And, you know, EB5 are usually in larger projects like that, you know, real significant downtown, you know, hotel type of developments that the Chinese really want to have some visibility. You know, they don't invest their money foolishly. You know, they look for investments that they can really, you know, get that return, and it would get the visa to them quickly. Mm-hmm.
I'm really excited, actually, because I'm learning a lot of stuff here. My name is Janelle Bivens, and I am the Executive Director of the Hoist Youth Center, and actually I'm a board member of the 51st Street Business Association. One of the things I was looking at, I had a question about, too, was what was the IFF funding? I wasn't sure about what that was. And also, I don't know if I missed this or not, but are the artists selling their artwork in order to help sustain the cost of the building? Like, how is the sustainability of the cost of the building occurring? You know, it was such a big project. Mm-hmm. How do you, you know, pay light, gas?
Yeah. Well, you know, I can say certainly the artist, if they're selling their products, it's not going to the building at all. That is something that is actually helping them maybe pay their rent, which is always a good thing. But, you know, so it just gives them additional income. But no, we don't partake in what they may be selling on site. But it is certainly, again, that circulation of a dollar in a community is really what we're looking for, where people, other businesses can come into that neighborhood and that dollar can stay there as long as possible, which will certainly help the community at large.
Sarah, could you talk about the IFF line item that she asked about?
Yeah, IFF is a CDFI. There's so many acronyms in affordable housing. Does anyone know what IFF stands for? Thank you. I live in Minnesota.
It used to, but doesn't anymore, because
Okay.
they're not only in Illinois.
But they're a community development financing institution. And so they could help you with new markets tax credits. For us in our Waukegan Karcher Art Space Lofts, they provided a first mortgage, permanent financing. And everyone at Karcher I wasn't the project manager on Karcher, but everyone at ArtSpace just raves about working with them, and really supportive partner. The work we do is very hard, and they're really supportive. So that was that was their role. And then about the artists, that's the goal, and I think when I talked a little bit on the switching station, the programmatic piece, and I was thinking also about your question about neighborhood transformation. We were really limited on the square footage there, so we don't have that ground floor commercial space that really activates the sidewalk at the pedestrian level. And then there's a shortage of space. So our typical art space project does have great gallery space, and usually the downtowns have started an art walk. So the gallery is open during those art walks. Artists can sell their work, and then we try and partner with cultural institutions that can provide capacity building or entrepreneurial development. That's become a really common theme at ArtSpace, is to partner with like a BizTech or a workforce development center so that they can do some small business training and help them understand how to think of their art like a business, to help them increase their income from their art. So,
Thank you. I would just add to your question on IFF, come back at 1:45 and you'll hear more from Robin about how to work with them. We actually have someone here from their staff to talk more about that.
Yeah, I would just add that we hired them as our owner's representative because, as I said, we're not developers. We had never bought a building before. We had never rehabbed a building. And so, although we had great architects and a great general contractor, one of their architects from IFF was there on the site with us too, and there would be times when the architect wants to do something that's nice and aesthetically pleasing, and the contractor wants to do something, that's cheap and quick, and they're looking at me to make the decision, and so I would rely a lot on the person from IFF to say, okay, translating into English, this is what they are arguing about. And they were also very helpful sometimes on beating up vendors who were not coming through on things for us. And they would just say, well, that's not our problem. You told us you would get them this, so you need to get it over here. So it was extraordinarily helpful for us to have that type of support.
I'm over here. Hi. My name is Daniel. I'm with the National Public Housing Museum. And this question is for Sarah and Debbie. And maybe, Margaret, you could have some insight into this. So new markets tax credits and EB-5 visas are incredibly complex and also only really for big projects. And I think a lot of the buildings that maybe that our folks here have in mind don't really reach that size to have those funding choices available to them. You both mentioned at the beginning that you've had projects with historic tax credits, and which to me seem a little bit more feasible for some of these smaller projects. We do not have a statewide historic tax credit in Illinois, and I was wondering if you could speak to how that might help close the gap in terms of these projects that you're wanting to finance. And actually, there currently are some efforts underway to get Illinois tax credit, and maybe if you could speak to that. And then, Margaret, if you could speak to maybe how you worked with historic tax credits and how that has helped your project get off the ground as a smaller project, that would be really, really helpful. Thank you.
Well, I can try to speak to the state tax credit, and actually along the river's edge, we're trying to get that expanded now through the entire state. I guess one holdback to that is the fact that it hasn't been very successful. You know, we had 4 neighborhoods. It was Elgin, Rockford, Aurora, Peoria, and I think I might be missing one, but it was along the river's edge. But actually, we have not closed one for state tax credits yet. So now we're really trying to expand that, to have it go through the state, but to try to see how we can make that work better. You know, so having it just confined to certain areas certainly did not help. And then most of those areas have been hit so hard, our major downstate cities, from the economic crisis, that it's really a ghost town. Trying to rebuild the downtown Aurora and building downtown Elgin, it has been really a challenge. And I agree, there's been much improvements in Elgin for this, but in other our major cities, it's still pretty dismal. So we're hoping that the state tax credits can be salvaged and put permanent all over the state instead of just along the river edge.
We didn't use any kind of tax credits.
I would say one state we've worked in that has a state historic tax credit that works really great is in Ohio. We have a project in Hamilton, which is a suburb of Cincinnati, it's a competitive program, so it's a little different from the federal program in that they have a limited pool of credits to award, but it's very meaningful, provides a lot of equity. I think our state credit is providing the project with $1.7 million, and the federal credit is not capped. It's just based on how much eligible basis you have. And I think it's, you know, the federal credit is maybe going to generate about $2.3 million in equity. So it's huge. I mean, it can make the difference between a project happening and not happening. So if you're looking for great models out there, I would say Ohio would be a good one.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi. I was wondering, it was said earlier that these schools become vacant, and it's often an indicator of the neighborhood as a whole. And so I would think that there'd probably be other vacant buildings in the area. So why schools? So like, why would you? Because you said they kind of have different programs. They have wide halls. Like, why would a school be like a better choice to refurbish than another vacant building in the neighborhood?
Certainly from my perspective is the raising the capital necessary to get it done. And in these type of schools, it could be the catalyst that will spawn other things. So when you have a high visibility project, you know, that is kind of central to the neighborhood, that you can, you know, factor a lot of programs around it, I think that may be because of you having the additional funds to help, you know, match sources and uses of funds to get it done, is really that catalyst that should be addressed, you know, immediately, you know, to spawn other developments in and around the community, because it's so big, you know, when you're looking at a vacant school, it could really do lots of damage to the morale and homeowners, you know, in the area, not to talk about breeding crime and, you know, other type of social illness that we would prefer not to have to deal with.
Yeah, I would just actually underscore that point. What we saw in Uptown with Stewart School was that people, I think a school, especially if it's just recently closed, has a very special sort of role that perhaps an empty warehouse doesn't, as far as people's attachment to it and emotion of what it was for their family or for their neighborhood. And so I think there is, in many times, a different kind of emphasis there on that as returning something really valuable back to the community in a way that might be different with another vacant building. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists. And thank you again to our sponsors, White & Company, Jones Lang LaSalle. A couple other items. Please look on your seat. Perhaps you're sitting on it, or you might have already moved it, but we have a survey that we would love for you to fill out. You can leave it on your seat or hand it in on your way out. And we'd also like you, just noting here, upcoming events. if it interests you, please join us at these upcoming events as well. Those of you sticking around for the workshop, we'll be kind of tidying up the room a bit and starting again at 1:45. So enjoy a quick break. If you need to use the bathroom, keys are here at the front. Men's restroom is this way, women's is that way. Thank you so much.